I'd been in Oakwood Estates for 6 months when I realized I had a thief problem. Not just any thief, a neighbor thief, which was worse, the kind that smiles and waves while walking off with your stuff. The community looked perfect on paper: single-family homes with desert-friendly landscaping, a community pool, and reasonable HOA fees. Phoenix summers were brutal, but my small patch of Arizona had central air and enough shade trees to make the outdoors tolerable. I'd wanted a fresh start after my divorce, and 417 Saguaro Lane seemed ideal, until it wasn't. The first package went missing 3 weeks after I moved in. Nothing valuable, just some kitchen towels and a phone charger, but I remembered seeing the delivery notification. The second time, it was a set of work shirts I'd ordered. After the third missing delivery, I called Amazon, who confirmed drop-off with a photo of my front step. The packages were definitely being delivered. They just weren't staying delivered. I installed a basic security camera above my garage, angled toward the front door. It took just 4 days to catch her. The footage showed a woman in her mid-40s walking confidently up my driveway around 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. She wore expensive-looking exercise clothes and oversized sunglasses, her blonde highlighted hair cut in a neat bob. She scooped up my package without hesitation, tucked it under her arm, and walked away like she owned it. I paused the video, zoomed in, and recognized her immediately. She lived 3 houses down at 423. I'd seen her at the mailbox and walking a small white dog. I didn't know her name yet, but I was about to. I waited until evening when I spotted her watering plants on her front porch. I walked over with my phone, the video queued up. "Excuse me," I said, trying to sound friendlier than I felt. "I'm Matthew from 417. I think there's been a mix-up with some of my deliveries." She turned, spraying water dangerously close to my shoes. "Oh, you're the new guy. I'm Denise Wagner." Her smile seemed practiced, her eyes scanning me quickly. "What kind of mix-up?" I held up my phone. "I've had several packages go missing, so I set up a camera. This was recorded yesterday." Her expression didn't change as she watched herself take my package. After a few seconds, she handed back the phone with a laugh that sounded like wind chimes. Pretty, but hollow. "That explains it. I'm always getting deliveries for 417 instead of 423. The drivers mix up our houses." She waved her hand dismissively. "I was going to bring it over once I figured out the confusion." "Did you open it?" I asked. "I might have, just to see whose it was," she said, her voice light. "And the other packages? I've had at least 3 go missing." "Haven't seen those," she said, turning back to her plants. "Must be porch pirates. It's a big problem in nice neighborhoods like ours." I stood there, off balance. She'd admitted to taking one package while denying the others, all without appearing the least bit embarrassed. "Well, I'd appreciate getting my package back," I said. "Of course, let me grab it for you." She disappeared inside her house, returning a minute later with an opened Amazon box. "Here you go. Sorry for the confusion." The box had been neatly sliced open, the packing slip removed. Inside were the 2 paperbacks I'd ordered, untouched, thankfully. I nodded a thanks and walked home, feeling uneasy despite getting my stuff back. The package incident would have been the end of it if things hadn't escalated 2 weeks later. I'd spent a Saturday installing a small garden bed along my front walkway: tomatoes, peppers, and herbs. Nothing fancy, but it made the entrance look nicer. Monday morning, I stepped outside to water them before work and found half the plants gone. Neat, empty holes where my tomatoes and basil had been. I knew exactly where to look. Sure enough, my missing tomato plant sat in a ceramic pot on Denise's front porch alongside what appeared to be my basil. She hadn't even bothered to hide them. I knocked on her door, my patience wearing thin. When she answered, I pointed to the plants. "Those are mine. You dug them up from my garden last night." Denise laughed, that same musical empty sound. "Don't be silly. My gardener brought those yesterday." "You have a gardener who works on Sunday nights?" "He comes when he can," she said, leaning against the door frame. "I'm sure yours looks similar. But these are definitely mine. They're the exact varieties I planted. Even the support stake has the marker tag I left on it. She picked up the pot with my tomato plant and examined it with exaggerated care. Well, that's strange. My gardener must have made a mistake. Perhaps he got confused about which house needed plants. Does your gardener have a name? I asked. I'd like to talk to him. He's independent, pays in cash. I don't have his contact info. She set the plant down, her smile never faltering. But I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding. I knew I was being lied to. The neighborhood Facebook group confirmed no one had seen a gardener at Denise's house, ever. She did her own yard work, meticulously and often. I'd like my plants back, I said. She crossed her arms. I paid good money for these plants. They were in my yard yesterday. I have photos. This was a bluff. I hadn't thought to photograph my garden, a mistake I wouldn't make again. We stared at each other for a long moment before she sighed dramatically. Fine, take them if you're going to be difficult about it, but I really think you should check with your nursery. They probably sold us the same plants. I collected my stolen greenery and carried them home, replanting them in their original spots. That night I bought a motion-activated floodlight for my front yard. Over the next month I learned a lot about Denise Wagner. The neighbors called her Karen behind her back, a nickname she'd apparently earned long before internet memes made it popular. She'd lived in Oakwood Estates for 12 years, served on and been removed from the HOA board twice, and had boundary issues with multiple neighbors. She took my holiday wreath last December, said Mrs. Abernathy from across the street. Claimed a delivery service left it at her house by mistake. It had my family name painted on it. She borrowed my pressure washer, added Tom from next door, returned it with an empty gas tank and a broken nozzle. Said it was like that when she got it. What struck me most was the resignation in their voices. Everyone knew about Denise, but no one confronted her anymore. It wasn't worth the drama, they said. After my hose nozzle disappeared, followed by a solar garden light, I decided to approach the HOA. Their office occupied a small building by the community pool, staffed part-time by a retired man named Gerald. Ah, yes, Ms. Wagner, Gerald said, sighing as he looked at my written complaint. We've heard concerns before. And, I pressed, and we've spoken with her. He pushed his glasses up his nose. Without concrete evidence, there's not much we can do beyond that. I have evidence. I caught her on camera taking my package. Did she return it when asked? Well, yes, but... Then it's resolved. Gerald tapped his fingers on the desk. Look, Mr. Reynolds, the HOA handles architectural compliance, common area maintenance, and community standards. Neighbor disputes are best handled directly or through proper legal channels if necessary. I left with an empty promise that they would look into it and send a general reminder about property boundaries to all residents. My complaint joined what I imagined was a thick file of similar reports. Back home, I started a journal dedicated to the Denise problem. Each entry detailed what went missing, when I noticed it gone, and whether it reappeared. Some items did, usually damaged. I took daily photos of my yard, date-stamped and saved to a cloud folder. When my new garden gnome vanished 2 days after installation, I had photographic proof it had existed. The pattern became clear. Denise took whatever caught her interest: packages, plants, decorations. When confronted, she'd either deny everything or create elaborate excuses involving mix-ups, invisible workers, or honest mistakes. She treated the neighborhood as her personal shopping center, secure in the knowledge that politeness and bureaucracy protected her from consequences. Every new theft left me feeling more violated. This was my home, my safe space after a difficult year, and she was systematically undermining my sense of security. I found myself checking my windows when I heard noises at night, rushing home during lunch to make sure everything was still there. Sitting at my kitchen table one evening, flipping through weeks of documented thefts, I realized documentation alone wasn't working. The HOA wouldn't help. Neighbors had given up. Denise knew exactly what she was doing, and she knew she was getting away with it. I closed my journal and opened my laptop. If I wanted to stop her, I needed to catch her in a way she couldn't talk her way out of. No more after-the-fact confrontations or he-said-she-said situations. I needed irrefutable evidence and witnesses who weren't me. It was time to set a trap. After my realization that documentation alone wouldn't stop Denise, I spent the next weekend doing something productive to clear my head. Landscaping had always been therapeutic for me, and my front yard needed work. I dropped nearly $300 at a local nursery on Mexican evening primrose, desert marigold, and several varieties of drought-resistant shrubs. I added 8 solar-powered pathway lights and laid down decorative stone edging to create clean borders around the new plants. By Sunday evening, I stood back and admired my work. The yard looked professionally done. A welcome sight after hours of digging in the hard Arizona soil and carefully positioning each plant. My back ached, but the satisfaction of creating something beautiful made it worthwhile. I took several photos from different angles, partly for my own satisfaction and partly to continue my documentation habit. Monday morning changed everything. I stepped outside to check on my handiwork before heading to work and stopped short at the edge of my porch. 2 of the solar lights were gone, not knocked over, not blown away, but completely missing. The circular indentations in the soil showed exactly where they'd been. Worse, the stone edging I'd meticulously installed had been damaged. 3 pieces were cracked as if someone had deliberately stomped on them. This wasn't mere theft. This was destruction. This was personal. I crouched down to examine the broken stones, running my fingers over the jagged edges. Each piece cost $8, but it wasn't about the money. These weren't random acts of opportunity anymore. This was targeted vandalism. My yard, which had looked perfect just 12 hours ago, now bore the scars of someone's spite. I knew exactly who had done it. Standing in my damaged yard, something hardened inside me. I'd tried being reasonable. I'd tried documentation. I'd tried the proper channels with the HOA. None of it had worked. I took photos of the damage, went back inside, changed into my work clothes, and drove to the credit union. Throughout the day, I found it hard to focus on customer accounts and loan applications. During my lunch break, I made a list of what I needed and mapped the quickest route to Best Buy in Tempe. After work, I drove straight there, marched inside, and headed for the home security section. I selected a Ring doorbell camera with night vision capabilities and cloud storage. Next to it, I found a smaller wireless camera that could be hidden and accessed remotely. I added an AirTag to my cart, along with mounting hardware and extra batteries. The total came to just under $400, an expense I hadn't planned for, but one that felt necessary. "Setting up a security system?" the cashier asked as she rang up my items. "Something like that." I didn't feel like explaining. At home, I got to work immediately. I installed the Ring doorbell first, replacing my old doorbell with minimal fuss. The app setup took 10 minutes, and I tested the motion alerts by walking in and out of its view. Next came the second camera, which I mounted inside a decorative birdhouse I already owned. I positioned it facing my front yard, with a clear view of the path and the area where my solar lights had been stolen. Both cameras connected to my home Wi-Fi and sent alerts directly to my phone. The final touch was the AirTag. I took an empty Amazon box from my recycling bin, placed the activated AirTag inside along with some wadded-up newspaper for weight, and resealed it with packing tape. I even printed a fake shipping label with my name and address to make it look legitimate. When finished, it looked exactly like a normal delivery. As I worked on the birdhouse camera, I felt eyes on me. Looking up casually, I caught a glimpse of Denise in her front window, watching me. I continued working as if I hadn't noticed, making sure my movements looked routine and unworried. Let her think I was oblivious. Let her think I was an easy target. I placed the fake package prominently on my porch, angled so both cameras would capture anyone approaching it. Then I went inside, pulled up both camera feeds on my tablet, and waited. That night, I checked my phone every few minutes. Every notification made me jump, but most were just alerts about cars driving by or cats wandering through my yard. I slept poorly, my phone on maximum volume beside my pillow. The next day at the credit union felt endless. I kept my phone on my desk, glancing at it between clients. My supervisor noticed my distraction. "Everything okay, Matt? You seem on edge." "Fine," I said, "just waiting for an important notification." The first day passed with no sign of Denise near my package. I began to wonder if she'd seen me setting up the cameras and grown suspicious. When I got home, I checked that the AirTag was still active in the package, then left it in place for another day. I barely slept the second night either. My mind kept replaying all the small violations over the past months. The missing packages, the stolen plants, the damaged garden edging. Each one on its own seemed minor, something you could brush off. Together they formed a pattern of disrespect that had turned my new home into a place of tension and uncertainty. The second afternoon, while helping a couple refinance their mortgage, my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I excused myself for a moment and checked the notification. There she was. The Ring footage showed Denise walking confidently up my driveway wearing yoga pants and her signature oversized sunglasses, her blonde bob gleaming in the afternoon sun. She looked around quickly, picked up my package, tucked it under her arm, and walked away with the same entitled stride I'd seen in my first security video. I watched the second camera footage as she crossed my lawn, stepping on my newly planted primrose in the process. The AirTag app confirmed what I already knew. My package was now moving away from my house toward 423 Saguaro Lane. I had her. I stared at my phone screen, a wave of righteous validation washing over me as I watched Denise walk away with my package. The couple sitting across my desk at the credit union were still talking about interest rates, but their words faded into background noise. After months of theft and lies, I finally had Denise red-handed. "Mr. Reynolds, about the closing costs?" I snapped back to the present. "Sorry, just received an important notification. Let's continue." I rushed through the remainder of the refinance consultation, professional but distracted. The moment they left, I pulled up the AirTag app again. The blinking dot representing my package now sat stationary at 423 Saguaro Lane, Denise's house. More specifically, according to the app's precision tracking, it was in her garage. I dialed the Phoenix Police Department's non-emergency number, my heart thumping against my ribs as I waited through several rings. "Phoenix Police Department, how may I direct your call?" "I need to report a theft with evidence," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I have video footage of my neighbor stealing a package from my porch, and I can track its exact location right now." The dispatcher took my information and explained an officer would contact me shortly. I thanked her and hung up, immediately texting my supervisor that I needed to leave early for a home emergency. 20 minutes later, I was pulling into my driveway, already planning my next steps. Inside, I set up at my kitchen table, arranging my evidence like case files. I downloaded the latest footage from both cameras and took screenshots of the clearest frames showing Denise taking my package. I pulled up the AirTag location history, showing the item's journey from my porch directly to her garage where it currently sat. I added photos of my damaged garden edging, along with receipts for the solar lights and other items that had mysteriously disappeared over the past months. My phone rang around 4:30 p.m. Officer Rodriguez would arrive within the hour to take my statement and review the evidence. I paced my living room, occasionally glancing out the window toward Denise's house. The AirTag hadn't moved. At 5:15 p.m., a police cruiser pulled up in front of my house. 2 officers, a man and a woman, stepped out and approached my door. I met them on the porch. "Mr. Reynolds, I'm Officer Rodriguez. This is Officer Chen," said the male officer, a stocky man with a serious expression. "We understand you're reporting a theft?" "Yes, thank you for coming." I invited them inside and led them to my kitchen table where all my evidence waited. This isn't about just today, I explained, gesturing to my organized documentation. It's been going on for months. Small items at first, packages, plants, then garden lights and decorations. I've documented everything. Officer Chen picked up my journal and flipped through it. You've been thorough. I had to be. No one believed me, not the HOA, not the neighbors who'd given up fighting her. I showed them the ring footage from earlier that day, the unmistakable image of Denise walking off with my package. Then I pulled up the AirTag app on my tablet. The package she took contains an AirTag tracker. As you can see, it's been sitting in her garage for about 4 hours now. I swiped to show them the location history. It went directly from my house to hers at exactly the time shown in the video. Officer Rodriguez nodded slowly. You have the receipt for the items in the package? There aren't any actual purchased items in there, just the AirTag and some newspaper. I set this up as a trap after months of theft. The officers exchanged glances. I have receipts for all the other items she's taken, I added quickly, sliding across the folder containing my purchase records, including the solar lights she took 2 days ago. Those cost $40 for the set of 8. She took 2 of them. Officer Chen reviewed my documentation while Officer Rodriguez radioed in. After a brief conversation, he turned back to me. Based on your documentation and the tracking information, we have sufficient cause to check Ms. Wagner's property. We'll head over there now. What should I do? I asked. Stay here. We'll come back after we speak with her. I watched from my front window as the police cruiser drove the short distance to Denise's house. They parked out front and walked up to her door. Even from this distance, I could see Denise's body language change when she opened the door and saw the officers. Her typical confident posture stiffened with surprise. She spoke with the officers on her porch for several minutes, gesturing animatedly, her hands moving in familiar defensive patterns. Eventually, they all disappeared inside. My phone buzzed with a text from Officer Rodriguez. We're searching the premises with permission. Stay by your phone. I paced my living room for what felt like hours but was actually only 20 minutes. Finally, the cruiser pulled back into my driveway and the officers returned with evidence bags. One contained my fake package with the AirTag. Another held my 2 missing solar lights. The third, to my surprise, contained a garden gnome I hadn't even noticed was missing. A small decorative piece I'd placed near my backyard fence weeks ago and hadn't checked on recently. Found these items in her garage, Officer Rodriguez said. The package was on a shelf. The lights and gnome were in a storage bin labeled Garden. What did she say? I couldn't help asking. Initially claimed she hadn't taken anything, Officer Chen replied. When we showed her the AirTag information, she changed her story, said her handyman must have brought the items to her house by mistake. She doesn't have a handyman, I said. That's the same excuse she used about my plants last month. Yes, we figured that out, Officer Rodriguez said with a hint of a smile. When we asked for this handyman's contact information, she couldn't produce it. When we pointed out the camera footage clearly showed her taking the package, she admitted to that but insisted it was the only thing she'd ever taken, and she was planning to return it. But you found the other items. We did. We've issued her a citation for petty theft. Given the total value of the items taken, it's a misdemeanor offense. Officer Rodriguez handed me back my property. She's been officially warned that any further incidents will result in more serious charges. Thank you, I said, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. I know this might seem minor compared to other crimes, but it's been making me feel unsafe in my own home for months. Property crime may seem small, but it affects quality of life, Officer Chen said. You did the right thing with your documentation. Makes our job much easier when citizens keep good records. After they left, I returned the solar lights to their spots in my garden and placed the gnome on my front porch, a small act of reclamation. I just finished making dinner when my phone rang again. The caller ID showed Oakwood Estates HOA. Mr. Reynolds, this is Margaret Hildebrand, President of the Homeowners Association. Her voice carried an edge of formality tinged with discomfort. I've just received a call from Gerald about the police visit to Ms. Wagner's property today. Yes, they found several of my stolen items in her garage. A pause. I want to apologize for our insufficient response to your earlier complaints. It seems we underestimated the situation. I sat down at my kitchen table. I tried to tell Gerald. I had evidence even then. Yes, well. She cleared her throat. The board will be issuing Ms. Wagner formal warnings and fines according to our bylaws regarding theft and neighborhood disturbances. We take these matters seriously. I bit back a comment about how seriously they'd taken it when I first reported it. I appreciate that. Will there be a hearing? Yes, at next week's board meeting. We'd like you to attend to present your documentation, if you're willing. After hanging up, I stepped outside onto my porch. The evening air had cooled to a comfortable temperature and stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. From 3 houses down, I could see Denise's porch light on, but her silhouette didn't appear in any windows. The neighborhood felt different somehow, as if a subtle tension I'd grown accustomed to had finally released. I sat on my porch steps, looking at my garden with its returned solar lights glowing softly in the dusk. The gnome, which I'd positioned near my front steps, seemed to grin approvingly. For the first time in months, I felt at ease in my own front yard. The trap had worked perfectly. I had my proof, my property, and, most importantly, my peace of mind back. Whether Denise would change her ways remained to be seen, but at least now there would be consequences if she didn't. That knowledge alone made 417 Saguaro Lane feel like home again. I sat on my porch steps the next morning, coffee in hand, watching the neighborhood wake up. The sun had barely climbed over the eastern horizon, but the day already promised the typical Phoenix heat. My garden gnome grinned cheerfully from his restored position near my steps, and I found myself smiling back at the little guy. 3 days after the incident, I received an email from Margaret Hildebrand, the HOA president. The board had held an emergency meeting regarding Denise's behavior and issued her 3 separate fines, 1 for theft of personal property, 1 for trespassing, and 1 for violating the Community Harmony Clause of our neighborhood bylaws. The total came to $750, a substantial amount that even made me wince. The email also mentioned that Denise had been placed on what they called probation status within the community, requiring her to attend monthly reviews with the board for the next 6 months. Any further incidents would result in escalating penalties, including possible legal action from the HOA itself. I forwarded the email to my personal account for my records, then deleted it from my work computer. Part of me felt vindicated. Finally, someone besides me was taking Denise's behavior seriously. Another part wondered if maybe the punishment was excessive for some stolen garden lights and a gnome. Then I remembered the months of anxiety, the constant checking of my property, the violation of my personal space, and the vindication faded. Actions had consequences. Denise was finally facing hers. The first time I saw her after the police visit was 5 days later, when I was walking back from checking my mail. She emerged from her house, keys in hand, heading toward her car. When she spotted me on the sidewalk, she froze for a second, then abruptly changed course, crossing to the opposite side of the street. She kept her head down, sunglasses on despite the cloudy day, and walked briskly to her car without looking back. This became our new normal. If Denise saw me in my yard, she'd wait inside until I went back in. If we ended up on the same stretch of sidewalk, she'd cross the street or turn around. Once, at the community pool, she gathered her things and left as soon as I arrived, even though she'd been there first. The transformation was so complete it was almost comical. The woman who had boldly walked onto my porch to steal my packages now couldn't even make eye contact. "She's been avoiding me like I'm radioactive," I told Tom, my neighbor from 2 doors down, when he came over to borrow a ladder about a week after the incident. "Join the club," Tom said, helping me pull the extension ladder from my garage. After I confronted her about my pressure washer last year, she wouldn't even look at me for 3 months. Then she acted like nothing happened and tried to borrow my lawnmower. Did you lend it to her? Hell no. Tom laughed. Told her my nephew borrowed it. I didn't even have a nephew. This was the beginning of what I came to think of as the Great Denise Unburdening. Once word spread through Oakwood Estates about the police visit, neighbors started stopping by or catching me outside to share their own Denise stories. It was as if a dam had broken, and years of pent-up frustration came pouring out. Mrs. Abernathy from across the street brought over a homemade lemon cake as a pretext to tell me how Denise had not only taken her family wreath, but had also helped herself to potted plants, wind chimes, and once, bizarrely, a bag of potting soil Mrs. Abernathy had left by her garage. I saw her roll it across the street in a wheelbarrow, Mrs. Abernathy said, cutting me an enormous slice of cake. Broad daylight. When I asked what she was doing, she said she thought it was trash and was cleaning up the neighborhood. The Martinez family at the corner had caught Denise picking lemons from their tree without permission. The Wilsons had lost a decorative lantern from their porch. The Chen family reported missing garden tools that mysteriously reappeared, rusted and damaged, on their front lawn months later. Everyone had a story. What struck me most wasn't just the pattern of petty theft, but how long it had been going on. 5 years or more, according to some of the longtime residents. Why didn't anyone report her to the HOA before now? I asked Roberto Martinez when he stopped me during an evening walk. Roberto shrugged. We did, many times. Gerald would say he'd look into it and nothing would happen. Eventually, we figured the board was protecting her for some reason. Or they just didn't want to deal with her, his wife Diana added. She throws huge tantrums when confronted. It was easier for them to ignore the complaints. 2 weeks after the incident, I ran into Margaret Hildebrand at the community mailboxes. She was a tall woman with silver hair cut in a practical bob, always dressed like she was heading to a business meeting even when collecting her mail. "Mr. Reynolds," she said with a stiff nod, "how are things on Saguaro Lane?" "Quiet," I replied, unlocking my box. "No new thefts to report." She looked uncomfortable. "Yes, well, I want you to know the board has taken your situation very seriously." I sorted through my mail, mostly bills and credit card offers. "Unlike the previous complaints." Margaret sighed heavily. "I've only been president for 6 months. When I took over, there was no record of official complaints against Ms. Wagner in our files. It seems Gerald had been selective in what he brought to the board's attention." "Gerald has been running the office for years." "Yes, and it turns out he and Ms. Wagner are second cousins, something he failed to disclose." She gave me a significant look. "He's been replaced." That explained a lot. I felt a rush of anger thinking about all the times Gerald had dismissed my concerns, knowing full well who Denise was and what she'd been doing. "The board is reviewing all procedures," Margaret continued. "We're implementing a new online system for tracking complaints and violations to ensure nothing falls through the cracks again." She hesitated. "We owe you an apology, Mr. Reynolds, and our thanks." I raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For standing up when the rest of us failed to. It shouldn't have taken a police report to address the situation." I nodded, accepting her apology without saying more. It felt good to be validated, but it would have felt better if it had come months earlier. Exactly 1 month after the police visit, a "For Sale" sign appeared in front of 423 Saguaro Lane. I noticed it on my way to work, the red sign stark against Denise's impeccably maintained front yard. Something tight in my chest loosened at the sight. That evening, several neighbors texted me about the sign. The Oakwood Estates grapevine worked faster than any social media platform. The general sentiment was cautious optimism mixed with disbelief. After years of dealing with Denise, people were hesitant to believe she was actually leaving. I watched from my kitchen window over the next few days as potential buyers came and went. Denise would greet them wearing outfits that looked straight out of a real estate magazine, all pressed slacks and tasteful blouses. She'd smile and gesture around her property, the picture of a cordial homeowner. I wondered what stories she told them about the neighborhood, about her reasons for leaving. 2 weeks after the sign went up, a "Sold" sticker appeared across it. The very next day, Denise's driveway filled with stacks of moving boxes and plastic bins. I watched her carry load after load from her house to the growing pile, working with an intensity that suggested she couldn't leave fast enough. On moving day, a rental truck appeared in her driveway at 7 a.m. I was up early, making coffee, when I heard the diesel engine rumble to a stop. Peering through my blinds, I saw Denise directing 2 burly movers while pointing at various items. She wore yoga pants and a tank top, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, looking nothing like the polished woman who had shown her house. I went about my Saturday routine, weeding my garden beds and washing my car, as the movers loaded furniture and boxes into the truck. Around noon, they finished with the large items, and Denise began making trips with the smaller things she'd apparently set aside to move herself: plants, framed pictures, what looked like jewelry boxes. By late afternoon, the truck was packed. Denise made one final walkthrough of the empty house, then locked the door and handed the keys to a woman in a business suit who had arrived. Her real estate agent, I assumed. The movers had already left in the truck, leaving Denise to follow in her own car. I happened to be checking my mailbox when she emerged from her driveway. Her sleek gray BMW slowed as it approached my house. For a moment, I thought she might drive past without acknowledgement, but then she stopped. Our eyes met through her open car window. Without her usual sunglasses, I could see her face fully for the first time in weeks. She looked tired, the skin around her eyes tight with stress or lack of sleep. For a brief moment, something like regret flickered across her features. Not exactly remorse, but perhaps a recognition of what her actions had cost her. I didn't wave or smile. I simply nodded once, a minimal acknowledgement of our shared history and its conclusion. She held my gaze for another second, then returned the nod, a slight dip of her chin. Then she pressed the gas and drove away, turning at the end of Saguaro Lane and disappearing from view. I stood by my mailbox for a moment longer, letters clutched in my hand, feeling oddly empty. The victory I'd anticipated didn't bring the satisfaction I'd expected. Instead, I felt a complex mix of relief, vindication, and something almost like loss, not for Denise herself, but for the energy I'd invested in our conflict. That evening, as the sun set over Oakwood Estates, I carried my garden gnome from its spot near my porch to a newly created flower bed at the edge of my front yard. I'd prepared the spot that afternoon, digging a small circular garden and planting bright desert flowers around its perimeter. I placed the gnome in the center, its cheerful painted face visible from the street. It wasn't exactly a victory trophy. That framing suddenly felt petty and small. Instead, it was a reminder that sometimes you have to stand up for yourself, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it would be easier to let things slide. The gnome had become a symbol of something I'd learned about myself. I wouldn't be anyone's doormat, not even for the sake of neighborhood peace. As I watered the newly planted flowers around my recovered gnome, Tom walked by with his dog. "Nice garden addition," he called out. "The neighborhood thief would have loved it." I smiled. "Good thing she's gone, then." "Good riddance," Tom agreed. "You know, Reynolds, you did what none of the rest of us had the guts to do. You stood up to her." I shrugged. "I just got tired of losing my stuff." "Well, whatever your reason, you've made Oakwood Estates a better place." He tugged his dog's leash as the animal sniffed at my yard. Everyone's saying the same thing. After Tom continued on his walk, I stayed outside a while longer, enjoying the evening breeze. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from Susan, a woman I'd been seeing casually for a few weeks. She was free tomorrow if I wanted to get together. I smiled and texted back that I'd pick her up at noon. Perhaps it was time to focus on building something new instead of defending what I already had. As I headed back inside, I glanced once more at the gnome in its new place of honor. Its fixed smile seemed more genuine somehow, as if it too was ready to move forward.